Symbology of the Bible, Volume 2. Taxes? The issue of taxes is one that needs to be discussed as applicable to the USA, but perhaps to other countries as well, because of the way they are administered, and because some use the scriptures to establish them as a duty. This article is next in the order of the written volume, to be converted to this visual audio format, and appropriately, we arrive at it during the tax season. The information that follows may astonish some. Others already have the information, but it is not known as common knowledge. First, however, we should investigate the matter of a biblical requirement for paying taxes. One of the first biblical discussions regarding taxes is in the first book of Samuel. 1 Samuel 8 verses 6 to 19. But the thing displeased Samuel when they said, "Give us a king to judge us." And Samuel prayed unto the Lord. 7. And the Lord said unto Samuel, Hearken unto the voice of the people in all that they say unto thee. For they have not rejected thee, but they have rejected me, that I should not reign over them. 8. According to all the works which they have done, since the day that I brought them up out of Egypt, even unto this day, wherewith they have forsaken me, and served other gods. So do they also unto thee. 9. Now therefore hearken unto their voice. Howbeit, yet protest solemnly unto them, and show them the manner of the king that shall reign over them. 10. And Samuel told all the words of the Lord unto the people that asked of him a king. 11. And he said, This will be the manner of the king that shall reign over you. He will take your sons, and appoint them for himself, for his chariots, and to be his horsemen, and some shall run before his chariots. 12. And he will appoint him captains over thousands and captains over fifties, and will set them to ear his ground, and to reap his harvest, and to make his instruments of war and instruments of his chariots. 13. And he will take your daughters to be confectionaries, and to be cooks, and to be bakers. 14. And he will take your fields and your vineyards and your olive yards, even the best of them, and give them to his servants. 15. And he will take the 10th of your seed, and of your vineyards, and give to his officers, and to his servants. 16. And he will take your menservants, and your maidservants, and your goodliest young men, and your asses, and put them to his work. 17. He will take the 10th of your sheep, and ye shall be his servants. 18. And ye shall cry out in that day, because of your king, which ye shall have chosen you. And the Lord will not hear you in that day. 19. Nevertheless, the people refused to obey the voice of Samuel. And they said, Nay, but we will have a king over us. Many claim that the verses above establish that we are required to pay taxes. However, what is the proper context of those verses? Yahweh instructs Samuel to tell the people that if they choose to have a man king over them, rather than our father, as king with appointed judges, the man king will apply various taxes upon them. This is a necessary consequence of having a man king, because that king will have the responsibility of leading and providing for the people. Thus, he will necessarily have to take from the people the required materials and substance. But he can also succumb to corruption and reward those loyal to him by seizing the property of his subjects and giving it over to them. The verses above only indicate what Yahweh wanted Samuel to warn the people of, what a king would do. They don't establish that it is required by father. It is important, however, to realize that having a man king and paying taxes to him will not relieve the people from their obligation to tithe to the temple or church, because Yahweh did not relieve anyone from the obligation to tithe. It is clear, therefore, that after a man-king is placed over them, the people will have a double tax, if they are obedient to the king and the law. Furthermore, it was the keepers of the temple who were responsible for the social welfare of the children, and the judges for the leadership roles. So, do these verses actually establish that our Father requires us to pay taxes to the government? No, they do not. The verses above only indicate that our Father warned His people about the burden a man-king will bring upon them, and that when they finally realize and lament it, He will not hear their plea. To find the verses that require paying taxes by Yahweh's own words, we must look elsewhere. Here are other verses. Some say, establish the requirement. Ecclesiastes 8 verse 2. I counsel thee to keep the king's commandment, and that in regard of the oath of God. 3. Be not hasty to go out of his sight. Stand not in an evil thing, for he doeth whatsoever pleaseth him. 4. Where the word of a king is, there is power. And who may say unto him, What doest thou? Previously, we learned that Yahweh warned us a man-king would levy taxes on the people. And in the verses above from Ecclesiastes, we learned that we are to keep the king's commandments. Some say that this requires us to pay the king taxes, and they are correct. However, since there is not a king any longer, we are not required to pay any king's taxes. It is important to realize that the American Revolution succeeded in overthrowing the king and placing Yahweh back at the head of government, where he belongs. Thus, tax requirements revert to the state of affairs before the king was chosen. We are obligated to pay tithes to the temple or church only, but not any government taxes, according to the scriptures cited so far. But what about other scriptures? Here are more that some say establish that we are required to pay taxes. Romans 13 verse 5. Wherefore ye must needs be subject, not only for wrath, but also for conscience' sake. 6. For this cause pay ye tribute also, for they are God's ministers, attending continually upon this very thing. 7. Render therefore to all their dues, tribute to whom tribute is due, custom to whom custom, fear to whom fear, honor to whom honor. As a sidebar, we should interpret the Greek as reverence, not fear. The verses above from the book of Romans establish that we are to pay tribute where tribute is due. But what is tribute? Is it a tax? Who was the subject of these writings? These verses were addressed to Christians in Rome, thus the title of the book. The tribute, therefore, was required to be paid by foreigners for the privilege of being allowed to remain within the Rome.
While individual non-citizens, peregrini, living in the city of Rome were rarely kicked out, solely for failing to pay the poll tax, tributum capitis, they faced brutal personal and financial consequences that often made staying in the city impossible. In the Roman world, tax evasion was viewed as a crime against the state. From the Peregrini Rome's Provincial Subjects by academia.edu via the AI Overview.
In some cases, tribute can be considered a tax, but the deeper root, implied meaning of the term tribute is money paid to another to ensure that they do not come against you.
Foros. From G5342. A load, as borne, i.e. figuratively, a tax, properly individual assessment on persons or property, whereas G5056 is generally a toll on goods or travel, tribute. And the root,
Pharaoh.
G5342, pharaoh, to bear or carry, in a very wide application, literally and figuratively as follows. KJV, be bear, bring forth, carry, come, plus let her drive, be driven, endure, go on, lay, lead, move, reach, rushing, uphold.
So, the primary application of the Greek is a burden as load being carried, and the root means be driven, carry, etc. This suggests something other than a monetary tax. In fact, tribute was common in times long ago, where those unable to protect themselves from stronger opponents paid money, some commodity, or service, rather than fight.
Differences from modern taxation. Tribute was not generally collected in a regular bureaucratic manner like modern taxes. It was a sign of political submission, a sign of allegiance, or respect, that was often negotiated, and failure to pay resulted in immediate punishment. From Tribute and Tributary States. February 4, 2025, University of California, San Diego, via the AI Overview.
The question now is, are there any government agencies around today that require a tribute paid to them to protect your sovereignty? It might surprise you to know that the answer is yes. The IRS, also known as the Internal Revenue Service. Even if we are to interpret the tribute mentioned above as a tax, it is still qualified as a tax to whom a tax is due. Since we are no longer subject to a man-king, is the government due a tax from us? The following verses will determine whether or not a tax is due to the government. 1 Peter 2 verse 13. Submit yourselves to every ordinance of man for the Lord's sake, whether it be to the king as supreme. 14. Or unto governors as unto them that are sent by him, for the punishment of evildoers, and for the praise of them that do well. 15. For so is the will of God, that with well-doing ye may put to silence the ignorance of foolish men. 16. As free, and not using your liberty for a cloak of maliciousness, but as the servants of God. These verses are another example of why one should go to the original languages. The word interpreted as ordinance has a different meaning. It means build, construct, form. The difference between a law or decree, such as an ordinance, is demonstrated below.
Ordinance. Diatagma. Diatagma. Tisi. Tise, creation.
This is confirmed by the ISA 3.0, which has verse 13 as follows, from the CLV, 1 Peter 2 verse 13. You may be subject to every human creation because of the Lord, whether to the king as a superior. It then goes into the next verse. However, we see a different interpretation. Now, an ordinance, which is a law, can be considered a creation of the ruling entity. But this is a good example of verifying what the word is saying. Here in 1 Peter, we finally arrive at verses that establish the duty to pay a tax. However, it is stipulated that the tax must be established by ordinance, which is to say law, and those sent by Yahweh, which includes those allowed to be in those positions. Although it can be construed that the verses still apply only to the man-king or his governors, it is stipulated that we are to obey the ordinances of man. Therefore, where it is ordained by law, by those sent by God or allowed to govern, we are required to pay taxes. At this point, we need to determine if there is actually a federal law that establishes a tax is to be paid to the federal government of the USA. This is where the information may be a surprise to many that are not aware of it. The federal government of the U.S. of A. employs the Internal Revenue Service, IRS, to collect taxes on the incomes of the citizens annually. When the federal government began to formulate this agency to carry out its task, it first had to codify the laws and procedures it was going to use. These laws and procedures are contained in the Internal Revenue Code, IRC. The IRC is Title 26 of the United States Code, and, like any other legislation, must be enacted by the Congress of the U.S. to carry the force of law. Below is an exact quote from a United States government page.
Of the 54 titles, the following titles have been enacted into positive statutory law: 1, 3, 4, 5, 9, 10, 11, 13, 14, 17, 18, 23, 28, 31, 32, 35, 36, 37, 38, 39, 40, 41, 44, 46, 49, 51, and 54. When a title of the code was enacted into positive law, the text of the title became legal evidence of the law. Titles that have not been enacted into positive law are only prima facie evidence of the law. In that case, the statutes at large still govern. Note: Title 52 is an editorially created title, and Title 53 is currently reserved. For the current list of titles, see http://uscode.house.gov. From https://www.govinfo.gov/help, US Code.
And we can confirm Title 26 is not enacted statutory law. Below is a section from the United States Code Attorney Service, which publishes the code in volumes for attorneys to reference. The Internal Revenue Code, which governs tax collection, does not have an asterisk, therefore has not been enacted, yet is used and abused by the government to collect taxes by force. Some are aware of this fact already, but the vast majority of Americans have no idea that this is the reality. Below is an excerpt from an article that demonstrates the kind of tactics employed by the IRS. The operating principle at IRS is fear. Testimony reveals IRS tactics struggle between enforcers and modernizers. By R.A. Zaldivar of the Knight Ridder Newspapers, May 2, 1998, Washington. This week's Senate hearings into bullying and paramilitary overkill by the Internal Revenue Service went beyond the worst fears of many Americans. The Finance Committee heard testimony of taxpayers' lives turned upside down on trumped-up charges, whistleblowers driven to the edge of insanity, and managers who used the IRS's awesome powers to cover up improper conduct. The tactics employed have not changed much, and when one considers that the IRC isn't even statutory law, the actions of the IRS, as exemplified by the article above, establishes the outrageousness of that agency. It makes one begin to wonder, is there an American Gestapo? Well, actually, no, there isn't, but it is awful close. Being Christians, we must understand that the IRS and the IRC are only one of the hidden tools used to keep people in bondage to the system. The IRS and usury are two of the most insidious financial instruments that keep people in bondage to the financial system. Sections of the IRC cited by the IRS to impose penalties and interest on individuals often specifically state that they will be imposed on persons who are required to take certain actions. From the definition of person in the IRC, these sections are not applicable to individuals. Thus, the IRS operates on a fraudulent basis. It is administered by deception. Be aware of the beast system, so as to not become trapped. The amount of 10% to offer is established biblically, and a voluntary contribution on your net earnings at the end of the year is patriotic and may please Yahweh, because the voluntary contribution will only be on that money you have above and beyond your needs. In other words, it won't be a burden on you, and it won't result in your bondage to the fraud. For, in the end, the USA is still one of the countries Yahweh said his children would be planted in. He said the children of Abraham would be numerous and scattered. And so they are, all the way to the New World. And to close this article, some current events discussion. Tariffs.
Through 1860, Americans did not pay individual income taxes. Instead, the government collected revenue through excise taxes. The government started collecting income taxes from citizens starting in 1861 to finance the Civil War, but repealed the tax a decade later after the war had ended. When Congress tried to implement another income tax in 1894, the Supreme Court ruled the tax unconstitutional. This led to the ratification of the 16th Amendment in 1913, allowing for a federal income tax. With just 1% of Americans beginning to pay 1% tax on net income, the income tax system used today was born. From hnrblock.com, The History of Income Tax.
So, for 100 years, the USA relied on tariffs for revenue. Above is a superimposed image showing tariff rates beginning on the left and income tax revenue, beginning around 1934. Note that tariff revenue is proportional to the rate. As we see, income taxes on citizens replace the tariff revenue. The current U.S. administration proposes to end that situation or fix it and return to tariff revenue to replace the income tax on individuals. The scale of the change when income taxes started to be collected is more evident by the following graph.
From 1900 to 1960, the income tax revenue went from $0 to $40.7 billion. Meanwhile, tariff revenue went from $0.23 to $1.0 billion.
The current administration's tariff policies is reflected in the following graph. Tariff revenues have surged. This reflects the goal of replacing the income tax and eventually downsizing or eliminating the IRS.